Okay, camera's on, mic is on, lights and everything is a mess. Okay, let's grab script. All right, let's do this. Let's do the walk-on thing. Ready? Hey folks, welcome to the channel. So at the beginning of quarantine, I got obsessed with this custom car built by the Barris brothers shop called the Aztec. I think I've read damn near every article there is on it, every stub on Kustomrama, seen every picture on the Rixer's archives. I hunted the background to every YouTube video, anything that I could find to understand the car better. In fact, I tried to build my own Hot Wheels version of the car, which I think turned out like okay for someone who doesn't build model cars and is nearly blind and can't control their hands very well. I think I did okay. But the more that I read about this car, the more that I thought was still missing from the story. I thought like a really cohesive, deep dive into the history of the car would be worth exploring. So that's what I put together for you guys today. This is going to focus on a lot of the Aztec. We're going to tell you about what the car is, how it became, where it went, but we're going to focus on one part of the story that I think makes it stand out uniquely amongst other custom cars, because while there are a lot of weird stories in customs, the story of the Aztec is a story about the Barris brothers and the Barris brothers shop, story about custom car history in general, a story about bank robbers, machine guns, explosives, drug trafficking, a brutal murder, and the curse of the Aztec. The Aztec is one of my favorite custom cars of all times. It was built at just the perfect point in custom car history, early enough to close out that sleek early 50s custom style, but it also brought in the wild fins and the quad lights that would define what a radical custom with a capital K would be for decades to come. But let's start at the beginning. The Aztec started its life as a stock 1955 Chevy convertible. In fact, it was one of the first 1955 Chevy convertibles that was sold in Los Angeles and was bought by a young custom car enthusiast named Bill Carr. Born in West Virginia, Bill's dad was a mechanic and a body man that had planted the custom bug in Bill's head at a very young age. When Bill was a young man, out on his own, he made his way straight to Southern California. He worked as a successful insurance adjuster, made some friends in the local car scene, rented a house in the Hollywood Hills, and bought his brand new 55 Chevy when he was only 26 years old. Now, Bill knew he wanted to build a custom as soon as he bought the car, so he started almost immediately by shaving the emblems, the door handles, and the trim all by himself, then got some help from his housemate's brother, who was a talented metal worker, to lower it and install the 1956 Packard taillights and hood the headlights. Okay, so I want to make a point of this because I think this gets lost a little bit when we look back at customs of the 1950s. In 1955, American auto companies had really only been building new cars and new body styles for about a decade. And up until 1955, these big like generational changes didn't happen that often. Just look at a 1949 to 1952 Chevy, for example. Besides some relatively small trim changes and some subtle nuances, the cars look pretty much identical. And then 53 to 54, the changes get a little more drastic, but still not a huge difference. But in 1955 for Chevy, everything changed. There was a radical new body style, unlike everything that it had before. And for the first time significantly in GM's history, the V8 was available. So yeah, I know there's the 1918 Series D, but you know what I mean. The first real small block Chevy came out in 1955. So, and the car was a huge hit. So Bill Carr not only just bought an expensive brand new car with radically new styling, but he had the chutzpah to take a torch to it, like practically off of the factory floor by himself. Now, this was not a safe move then, and he didn't have to do this to get all of the recognition that one would get for building a new custom. This would have stood out a lot when it was done. So don't catch yourself thinking that this was just another mild custom at this point. Sure, it had shaped door handles, hooded headlights, and Packard taillights. But those Packard taillights, those were brand new. They just came out. He was customizing it in 1956. This stuff wasn't passe and done a million times since then. This is where the rules were written. And so remember that when you look back at this. It may look familiar because there's a lot of people that did the same thing since 55, but these changes were groundbreaking. And Bill Carr was cutting up a brand new vehicle to do this. It is really impressive. But Bill Carr knew that he wanted more, and he hatched a plan with some of the most talented and visionary automotive customizers around. Because you see, Bill's friend and housemate wasn't just any shop owner, and he knew how to build a wild custom. Bill's friend was none other than George Barris. And between Bill, George's brother Sam, Junior Conway, Dean Jeffries, and Bill Carr, building a cool cruiser just wasn't enough. Bill wanted to build the wildest custom in the world. So just a side note here, most of the body mods were designed and performed by Bill Carr, shown here hammering away on the hood of the Aztec, who was an entirely different guy than Bill Carr. Bill Carr was originally named Bill Ortega. He actually changed his name to Carr during the build. Now, I don't know what sparked this. I don't know if it was like a nod to Carr, or if it was like supposed to be a pun, like Bill Carr, like build the car. I don't know. So while this video is getting long enough already, I should acknowledge real briefly that while the choice to change his name to Dakar is kind of a mystery to me, the choice to change from Ortega is actually something that's really common in immigrant groups, and it's kind of sad. Every source that I found that had something to say about this said that he basically changed the name so he and his family could avoid racism. They didn't want to stand out with a Latino surname, so they decided that Dakar sounded less, I don't know, foreign. I don't know. As someone whose family came to America as Celestes and became Celeste, I get it. This is a complicated choice, and I don't want to make too light of that, although it does cloud the narration of this a little bit, so I'll try to over-enunciate. Okay, anyways, let's get back to the car. No. The car. One of the things that I love about this car being built in this era was that it was a radical custom before the age of metal finishing. When Barris started out on this version of the car that we know as the Aztec, it was 1957, a wild year for factory sheet metal, and there was a whole new world of big fins and quad lights for him to work with. Barris himself said, "We didn't have English rollers at the time, or MIG welders, or super cutters. Everything we did to shape the metal was done by hand. Skirts were all hand-formed. We used factory parts to produce the custom pieces, like the oval grills and the pans. We'd also turn them upside down to make the side pieces." Side pieces meant something completely different back then. And George Barris was right. He was the master of this. Well, the idea to use factory sheet metal to create a custom look was nothing new by 1957. 1957 was the best time in automotive history to be doing this. Never before had there been this much work, this much engineering, this much tooling into making wild shapes, from fins to quad lights to grill shells to chrome. Detroit was pumping out crazy stuff at the time, and Barris and his shop, they were the experts on taking all of this, reimagining it, and putting it into something new that looked sort of like a factory custom or a concept car or something really high value, when the fact is it really started with some of the most humble origins, like parts from a Studebaker. And so as we go into the build of the Aztec, I think it's really important to acknowledge where we're at in custom car history, because by 1956, 1957, everyone knew who George Barris was. He was the guy who was building cars in Southern California. There were a ton of other shops. A lot of people did great work as well, but Barris was the showman. He was the figurehead. In a lot of ways, he was like the P.T. Barnum of car culture. And so there's this interesting dichotomy from the shop at this point, where on one side you have really high-end builds like the a la carte or like the Aztec, and on the other, you're starting to see a lot more customization products like kits or magazines with how-to articles that would teach you how to build these cars if you wanted to try on your own. Yeah, you could even buy a Barris Customs badge for your car without ever entering the shop. And so in that way, Barris had sort of used these amazing cars like the Aztec that cemented his reputation as the guy who knew what he was doing, or knew how to hire people who knew what they were doing. And could sell that to America. So I think the Aztec is the high point of the Barris shop because it's the last real collaboration between George and Sam Barris. It's the last car that really leans into the era before it of coach building, customization, and was also forward looking into the future where there are big fins coming and quad lights and any off the shelf part that was available that could make this car look like it was from the future. The Aztec was the car that cemented that as what a custom car in 1957 could be. And that's why I think it's really important to spend some time looking at what the build itself was and how it would shape the future of the Barris shop for years to come. Some of my favorite features on the Aztec, and the most prominent, at least literally, are the front and rear grille shells. They started out as a pair of 1953 Studebaker pans and are split with the upper lip of a 1957 DeSoto bumper that itself was narrowed and peaked, and they added these overriders. It has a bunch of other great touches too, from the reworked 57 Merc headlights, the radical chopped and cantilevered three-piece Hollywood top, and those massive lucite taillights, handmade by Bob Hirahata, tucked in the towering fins, which came from a Studebaker Hawk. It is an incredible car, completely radical for its day, and you could imagine how wild the Aztec must have looked sitting around the rest of the cars at the Portland Auto Show where it made its debut in November of 1957. The hellfire hurry that this car was built with pushed the builders to their limits, and the net result of their efforts was something truly breathtaking. Now, without a doubt, some incredible projects must have been pushed onto the back burner at the Barris shop to accommodate their friend Carr's dream. Sam Barris would leave the shop and head back to Northern California about halfway through the build in the summer of 1956 after chopping the windshield, but continued to travel back and forth to contribute to this Herculean effort to elevate the Aztec, making it something that truly represented the best of the late 1950s custom era. The extremely short timeline of the build got this high-dollar custom on the ground and out to shows quickly, which may have been one of the most consequential accomplishments because, if I'm following the timeline correctly, as it is pretty poorly documented, on December 7th, 1957, just days after the Aztec rolled out of its premiere at the Portland Auto Show, custom car history and the Barris shop was forever changed. On that fateful windy evening, across the street from the Barris Customs shop, young Dean Jeffries was having dinner when he noticed smoke coming out of the back of the building. He sounded the alarm and rushed into the burning shop to see what he could do to save it. He was only able to save one car himself, his then girlfriend Carol Lewis's, ironically, seaweed flame 56 Chevy. Pause for a second and imagine being the firefighter deployed to that and seeing this flamed car as the first thing. But anyways, the fire devastated more than 14 in-progress customs, including the Wildcat, an Archie Morris custom Jaguar. Now, when Barris made his claim to the insurance company, he claimed $250,000 in damages, which is about $2.5 million today, but the insurance company denied the claim, saying that it was an act of God. Fortunately, the Aztec and the a la carte were spared from the fire. It's not clear to me exactly where the Aztec was. I like to think it was still being taken off the trailer or something from the Portland show, but the a la carte was in the building and the flames stopped just short of it. The two cars would go on to represent the smoldering shop throughout the rest of the show season, two bold members of a small group of survivors from that era of customization on Linwood. In just under 2 years, Bill Carr's dream of owning the wildest custom car of all time had come to fruition. He had made it. The Aztec won the Custom Car d'Elegance Award at the Oakland Roadster Show just a few months later, in February of 1958. The a la carte also won big. It took home the 9-fitter AMBR trophy that year. So all in all, it was still a pretty sweet show season for the Barris shop, just months after they'd seemingly lost everything. And so what happened to George? Well, George Barris landed on his feet. Pretty much immediately after the fire, he took the Aztec and the Copper Cart out on the road, and he finished a strong show season. While he was out, he actually hired someone to oversee the rebuilding of the shop and sort of the restart of Barris Customs. A man named Gene Simmons. No, not that Gene Simmons, although wouldn't that have been cool? It's this guy. And who knows? Maybe having that distance from the shop, maybe being in a position to do more promotion than seeing the day-to-day of people working on cars, maybe that's what shaped the future of the Barris shop. There's a definite change from the 1950s, where it's just two brothers running a relatively well-known custom car shop, to something larger than life. The shop that built the Batmobile and the Monkeymobile and the Munsters coach. The 1960s were a crazy era for Barris Customs, and a crazy era for a Barris Custom in the Aztec. Because while that car may have rocked in the waters of the womb on Linwood Avenue in the 1950s, the world it was birthed into and would come to age in was the tumultuous 1960s. And here's where things started getting a little stranger. Because it's time to talk about the bizarre post-show car life of the Aztec, and it's time to talk about the curse. In an interview, Bill Carr had bragged that he had spent around $20,000 building the car, which is a ridiculous amount of money for the time. The average income in 1957 was $5,000 a year. The average home in California was about $10,000. Now, let's compare that to other cars of the time. Look at the Golden Sahara, which in 1955 was billed on the cover of magazines as the $25,000 custom car. So in 1961, for whatever reason, Bill Carr decides that it's time to sell the Aztec, and this is where the story starts to get a little stranger. So Bill had started talking with a guy in Arizona. The man told him he'd become recently independently wealthy, and that he was interested in buying the Aztec and another car in cash. Bill Carr was thrilled, so he made the arrangements to make the deal, get the loot, and sell the cars. I can't find too many more details about the transaction, but the net result of it was a man in Arizona got the cars, Bill Carr got the cash, Carr used the cash to buy a franchise insurance company, and everything seemed great for a minute, until, of course, the feds showed up to have a conversation with Carr. As it turned out, the cash that Bill deposited from the sale of the car had actually been stolen in a bank robbery. Bill had unknowingly sold the Aztec to one of the FBI's most wanted, a man they said was the most wanted man since Dillinger, the notorious bank robber One-Eye Bobby Wilcoxon from Salinas, California. So they call him that because he had a glass eye from a metalworking incident when he was a child. And before robbing banks, he actually worked in the fields in Salinas. Now, not how you might have thought. Apparently, he picked up a bit of Spanish when he was in and out of the joint. And so he was hired for his cruelty and ability to motivate workers. Bobby Wilcoxon and his partner, Alfred Nussbaum, were two of the most prolific bank robbers in the 1960s. Between 1960 and 1962, they robbed at least 7 banks. Now, since Wilcoxon bought the Aztec in 1961, that means for at least 1 year, the Aztec was owned by an active, on-the-run, bloodthirsty, most wanted bank robber. I doubt, with all the lead, that it would make a good getaway vehicle, but that Hollywood top might come in handy in a shootout. Now, why the Aztec? Why Barris? I don't know. I couldn't find that. I couldn't find anything that said that Wilcoxon or his partner Nussbaum were particularly huge enthusiasts about custom cars or the Barris shop, so maybe they just saw this as a good investment, or a good way to launder money, or maybe something to tuck away for later that they could cash out. Who knows? And on that, remember a few minutes ago when I said Wilcoxon had bought 2 cars, the Aztec, the main focus of this video? He actually bought another one too. His partner, Alfred Nussbaum, had bought Dean Jeffries' Porsche, the Custom Carrera, right? This was a pretty good time to be a bank robber, I guess. But it didn't last too long. Now, there's a story in the history that gets repeated a lot that I couldn't confirm. I feel it's worth mentioning here because Barry Mazza? I'm not sure. Let's go with Barry. Barry, the person who would restore the Aztec later, he had said that Bill Carr was directly related to Wilcoxon's arrest, and that he had ran this article in Hot Rod magazine that said there was a problem with the title, and that led Wilcoxon back to his house and the feds arrested him. I couldn't confirm that at all. In fact, the FBI's records show something a little bit different, but It's a pretty good story. I have no doubt that Bill Carr did everything he could to help. He had purchased a business with ill-gotten gains, so I'm sure he did anything that he could to show the feds that he was on their side. But this is just one of those many examples past the sale of the car where the details get a little muddied on the Aztec. So I'm going to do my best here. So, what do we know about what really happened? Well, some of the details are very clear, some of them are a little muddy, but there's still a lot to go on here. So, we know from what the FBI said that Wilcoxon and Newsbaum were on the road for a while. Now, at some point, the two had separated. Wilcoxon was a little more streetwise than Newsbaum, so they went about this in different ways. A Newsbaum had taken the custom Carrera across the country to Florida with the FBI hot on his trail. The feds finally found him because when Newsbaum registered the car in Florida, he registered it to an address. And when the FBI went to that address, they saw the Porsche there in the driveway and they surrounded the building to try to get Newsbaum out. Now, he managed to escape from there, but it was a short while after that he was arrested. All the while, the Porsche actually sat in the driveway of this apartment in Florida, where it reportedly remained for several years. Wilcoxon went about things a little bit differently. He decided to store the Aztec in a friend's garage in Phoenix, Arizona, but that didn't last too long. After he was arrested, the feds were able to track it down. It's a very difficult car to hide, and people ask questions. So in 1962, Wilcoxon's in jail, Newsbaum's in jail, the Aztec is in car jail with the feds. But the story continues because the curse lives on. During the course of their investigation, they tore through the perfect interior, reportedly looking for stolen money or weapons or some other evidence before selling the car at an auction where it eventually made its way to a wrecking yard in Tucson and from there into the hands of owner Sonny Doubt on the East Coast somewhere in the late 1960s. This photo from that era was taken by the legendary race car driver George Helmer and was famously submitted to Rod and Custom magazine. So at this point in the history, we don't know exactly what happened. There are a lot of conflicting stories online, but the important details are this guy, Sonny Doubt, bought the car and resold it to someone else. Eventually, it was owned by a drag racing promoter named Bill Holt on the East Coast, where they repainted the body just a solid red and then redid the interior. Now, according to the person that restored the car, the interior at that point was a stick-on tuck and roll, and the top was like a stick-on fake alligator skin. Pretty bold choices, and a strange thing to happen to a car that just a decade or so was just the coolest car in America. And that's where we pick back up with the curse. And there are two versions of this story. I'll tell my favorite first. At this point, the owners of the storage yard were trafficking drugs. So for the second time in the car's history, it was seized by the feds as a part of their investigation. Now, the more realistic version, Chop Olds on the Ham had posted this, and Barry had verified it himself. He said the Aztec was actually in a body shop waiting to be restored when the feds shut that down for tax reasons or something like that. And then the car was sent to a storage yard, which probably makes a little more sense. Either way, Walt was able to save the car from there. He got the Aztec back until in 1991, a very enthusiastic Barry was able to get the car and start the incredible restoration of it. Now, this part is very well documented. There's an excellent article in Rodder's Journal. There's a ton of info on Kustomrama and Custom Illustrated that has some great photos of it. But that takes us to the modern era, where the restored Aztec exists for us to see and appreciate. So that's it. That is the so-called Curse of the Aztec. Is that a little clickbaity? Yeah. So is the curse lifted? Well, I don't know. I mean, I do know the car didn't sell at Mecum, so I guess there's that. I got to admit, after doing all the research, it's a little disappointing that for such a great name, the Curse of the Aztec basically boils down to bad people doing bad things that had been somehow involved in the ownership or storage of the car. But it's still a great story. I mean, I just love looking at these old pictures of the car and thinking like, man, was there ever a body in the trunk? Did they actually store drugs in it? Like, what was this ever, full of bags of money with dollar signs on it? It's a fascinating story. So what happened to the car is history. It's very well taken care of now. But what happened to the criminals? I know you're all asking that. Well, Wilcoxon was released eventually and went back to jail almost immediately for being involved in a murder for hire plot where he killed a man with a tarp that he had shoved down his throat with a fucking broom handle. He was a really bad guy. Nussbaum's story is a little weirder. Nussbaum actually became a successful writer. He started corresponding with someone, a writer that he respected while he was in prison. Wrote under a pen name, put out some books, wrote stuff for magazines. He actually wrote some stuff for TV shows, all related to crime, if, not surprising, I guess. Nussbaum's an interesting character. He was a really smart guy, is what everyone said. And he actually got his start. The reason that he hooked up with Wilcoxon was because he would buy, he was a young kid then, he would buy explosive that hadn't been detonated from military surplus auctions and fix them so they could. In fact, this bomb here, this is an unexploded bomb that Nussbaum had built. And this is how the FBI actually tracked them. It was the fingerprints on the bomb at the scene that made them say that definitely it was these two and none other that robbed this bank. So there's some room for redemption for some people. The car, for sure, for sure, had a nice redemptive story arc. It's funny, there's this whole history of the car, this insanity that happened after it was at the Barris shop, up until it got restored. And to see some facts like in that yard when the feds cut apart the interior, like Perry Mazza took like 2 years to restore the interior, and cops just cut it the fuck apart like it was nothing. Probably for fun. You know how cops are. Anyways, Curse aside, it's a great thing for all of us that the car has been so painstakingly restored. The Aztec, to me, represents all of the things that made custom cars of the late 50s so great. And I'm really glad that it's still around today so people can see it and see what the best efforts of some of our best minds in customization came up with. Thank you so much for listening. I'll end it there. This is my first video for the channel. I'm really excited to have it done. I think I wrote the first draft of this in 2016, so it feels very cathartic to have it out into the world. So I appreciate you listening. If you want to help the channel, tell someone about the video, help spread the word, say you enjoyed it if you did, lie if you didn't. Sincerely, thank you so much for listening, and thank you for watching.